The restaurant sat on a quiet corner of a busy city street, the kind of place where soft music floated in the air and voices stayed low, even when people laughed. Warm lights reflected off polished tables, and the smell of fresh bread mixed with strong coffee. It was early evening, not yet crowded, but important enough that the staff stayed alert. People who came here expected good service and calm surroundings. A man entered alone and paused just inside the door. He was tall, dressed neatly, and carried himself with a careful kind of confidence. His suit was expensive but not flashy. He looked around for a moment, as if taking in the room and choosing where to sit. When the host greeted him, the man replied in English that was clear but marked with a strong Russian accent. His words came a little slower, shaped carefully, like he wanted to be understood correctly. The host nodded politely and led him to a table near the center of the room. The man thanked him, again with that noticeable accent, and sat down. He placed his phone on the table, straightened his napkin, and glanced at the menu without rushing. Everything about him suggested discipline and habit. This was someone used to meetings, schedules, and quiet control. At another table not far away, a small group of local executives had already ordered drinks. They wore tailored jackets and spoke with relaxed confidence. Their voices were low, but their laughter carried. When one of them heard the man's accent as he spoke to the host, he lifted his eyebrows and leaned closer to his friends. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, though not as quietly as he thought. One of the others smirked. "Yeah." Took him a while to say one sentence. They chuckled softly, glancing toward the man's table. It was the kind of laughter meant to stay private, but it still carried a sharp edge. They went back to their drinks, but their eyes drifted again and again in his direction. The waitress assigned to that section noticed everything. She had been working there long enough to read a room without trying. She saw the way the executives leaned together, the quick looks, the tight smiles. She also saw the man sitting alone, calm and unaware, studying the menu with focus. She approached his table with a polite smile. "Good evening. May I get you something to drink?" "Yes," he said, looking up. "Sparkling water, please. And I will look little more." "Of course," she replied, her tone natural and respectful. She wrote it down and moved away, not reacting to his accent at all. To her, it was just another voice, another person. As she walked toward the service station, she passed close to the executive's table. One of them leaned back in his chair and muttered, "I wonder how long this meeting will take if he talks like that." Another laughed into his glass. "Maybe we should get subtitles." They laughed again, louder this time. A couple at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably. The sound broke the calm mood of the restaurant, just slightly, but enough to be felt. The waitress paused for half a second, then kept walking. She had learned long ago that reacting too fast often made things worse. Still, something about the situation stayed with her. When she returned with the water, the man thanked her and asked a question about one of the dishes. He searched for the right words, forming his sentence carefully. "This fish, it is prepared with, how you say, lemon sauce." "Yes," she answered gently. "It comes with a light lemon sauce and vegetables." "Good," he said, nodding. "That is good." At the executive's table, one of them mimicked the nod quietly, copying the man's rhythm in an exaggerated way. Another covered his mouth, trying not to laugh out loud. They thought they were clever. They thought no one noticed. The man ordered his meal and went back to his phone. A message came in and he read it slowly, then typed a short reply. His face showed focus, not stress. This was clearly not his first business trip, and not his first time being in a place where he sounded different. The waitress delivered food to another table nearby and overheard the executives again. "I bet he's rich though," one said. "You don't wear a suit like that for nothing." "Yeah," another replied. "Money can't buy pronunciation." More quiet laughter followed. The waitress felt a small tightening in her chest. She had grown up hearing different accents every day. To her, the way someone spoke told a story of where they came from, not how smart they were. She kept her face neutral and continued working, but her attention stayed sharp. When the food arrived at the man's table, she placed the plate carefully in front of him. Please enjoy, she said. Thank you, he replied. It looks very good. As he began to eat, the executives ordered another round of drinks. Their confidence grew with each glass. One of them raised his voice slightly, pretending to repeat a word the man had used earlier, twisting the pronunciation until it sounded clumsy and wrong. They laughed openly now, no longer hiding it well. A few heads turned. The room felt different. The laughter no longer blended into the background noise. It stood out. The man looked up briefly, his eyes scanning the room. For a moment, it seemed like he might have noticed. His expression tightened just a little, then relaxed. He looked back down at his plate and continued eating, as if deciding that whatever it wasn't worth his attention. The waitress saw that moment clearly. She saw the choice he made. It wasn't weakness. It was restraint. She refilled a glass at a nearby table and listened as one of the executives said, "I don't even know what he's trying to say half the time." Another replied, "Does it matter? As long as the money talks." The words landed heavily, even though they were spoken lightly. The waitress felt a mix of frustration and calm clarity. She knew this kind of situation well. People often thought intelligence had a sound, a shape, a familiar tone. Anything outside that made them uncomfortable. She glanced again at the man. He sat alone, eating quietly, his posture straight. Whatever deal or meeting he had planned clearly mattered to him. He checked his watch once, then placed his fork down carefully, as if every movement had purpose. The executives, meanwhile, leaned back, relaxed, sure of their place in the room. They had no idea how exposed they already looked. The waitress took a breath and continued her work. She didn't know yet how the evening would unfold, but she could feel that something was building. The room held a quiet tension now, like a string pulled tight but not yet released. And while no one said it out loud, the balance in the room was already beginning to shift. The man finished his first course slowly, savoring each bite. He had an even, careful way of eating, placing his utensils down neatly after each mouthful. The executives nearby continued their quiet commentary, convinced that they were clever, imagining that no one could hear them clearly. But the waitress noticed everything. She moved past their table several times, refilling water glasses and dropping off small orders, her steps measured and calm. She could feel the tension in the air growing little by little. The man set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, pulling out a notebook from his leather folder. He opened it carefully and began to write a few notes, making sure to keep his handwriting neat. He looked thoughtful, his eyes scanning the page before he jotted something down. Occasionally, he glanced around the restaurant, observing how people interacted without making a sound. He seemed patient, as though he had learned long ago that patience often spoke louder than words. At the executives' table, the laughter became slightly louder, though still under the guise of subtlety. One of them leaned toward another and said, "He's probably used to speaking to people who nod and don't notice the mistakes." "Exactly," the other replied. "But it's entertaining to see it happen in front of us." Their eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and arrogance. They thought their small jokes would go unnoticed, that their social superiority made it acceptable. The waitress watched them for a moment, her hands busy polishing a glass, but her mind alert. She had seen this kind of behavior before. She had learned that people who mock others often reveal more about themselves than their targets. The man looked up from his notebook at one point. He noticed a small detail on the wall, a painting slightly askew, and reached over to adjust it without hesitation. It was a simple gesture, but it gave off an air of calm authority, a reminder that he noticed the world around him even in a moment of quiet solitude. The executives, meanwhile, continued whispering among themselves, now openly imitating his accent in subtle ways. They did not realize how obvious it had become, and how noticeable their attempts to mock him were. One of them even repeated a phrase from the man's earlier conversation with the hostess, twisting it slightly and watching for a reaction. The man's eyes briefly flicked toward them. There was no anger or defensiveness, only a quiet acknowledgement. Then he returned to his meal, his focus on what mattered to him. It was clear he was someone who measured his reactions carefully, someone who valued actions over words. The calm demeanor itself seemed to make the room feel slightly smaller, drawing attention to the subtle shift in power that no one yet wanted to admit. The waitress brought the next course, placing it carefully in front of him with a polite, gentle smile. "Here you go. I hope you enjoy it." "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but clear. He glanced at the plate, then at her, nodding slightly as a sign of appreciation. It was a simple acknowledgement, but it carried sincerity that the executives could not measure. After a few moments, the man looked around again, making brief eye contact with a few diners and offering small nods. His presence was quiet but commanding. People who watched closely noticed that he carried himself with a calm strength that required no words, no attention-seeking gestures. He was simply there, and that alone seemed to command respect. The executives continued their whispers, but now they were a little more cautious. One of them muttered under his breath, "He doesn't react." "Exactly," another replied. "It's like he knows something we don't." The waitress smiled faintly to herself as she passed by. She could see it. This man had a patience and awareness that most people lacked. And the executives, so focused on appearances and amusement, had no idea how little control they really had over the situation. The man continued to eat slowly, his movements deliberate. He occasionally made notes in his notebook, sometimes pausing to look up and observe the room. There was a quiet intensity to him that was almost magnetic. People began to notice, even the executives. They shifted slightly in their chairs, suddenly aware of the tension in the space. What had started as subtle mockery was now a moment of unspoken reckoning. The waitress returned to the executives' table with a refill for their drinks. She placed the glasses down without comment, her calm expression hiding any judgment she might feel. One of the executives tried to catch her eye and smirk, hoping for a shared amusement, but she simply nodded politely and moved away. The lack of acknowledgement frustrated them more than any words could have. They had expected her to participate in their game, or at least react visibly. Instead, she stayed composed, unbothered. The man finally closed his notebook and looked around the room once more. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to speak. The executives leaned forward slightly, sensing that something was about to happen, unsure what it might be. The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted from casual dining to subtle tension. Each movement, each glance carried weight. Then, the man stood up slowly, placing his napkin neatly on the table. He straightened his jacket and spoke, his accent noticeable but steady. "Excuse me, may I ask something?" The executives froze for a moment, unsure if he was addressing them. Their earlier confidence faltered slightly. They leaned back, pretending nonchalance, but the room seemed to tighten around them. The man's calm, deliberate voice had a clarity that cut through the chatter, a quiet authority that could not be ignored. The waitress, noticing the shift, paused in her work to observe. She could see the executive's brief hesitation, the subtle recognition that their behavior had consequences beyond what they expected. The man's presence alone, without confrontation or anger, had begun to restore balance in the room. The man's eyes met theirs briefly, polite but direct. Then he returned to his seat, continuing his meal in the same deliberate, careful manner as before. The executives glanced at one another, a faint unease creeping in. Their laughter had died down, replaced by self-conscious silence. The waitress quietly refilled water glasses, aware that the moment of ridicule had passed, at least for now. She moved through the restaurant with quiet efficiency, but her attention remained on the man and the executives. She understood that the dynamic had shifted. Subtle respect was replacing ridicule, and the calm patience of one person had begun to outweigh the noisy arrogance of several. It was a small, almost invisible change, but powerful nonetheless. The man continued eating, occasionally glancing around and making notes. He exuded a quiet confidence that required no approval, no laughter, no recognition. And the executives, who had started the evening with mockery and subtle cruelty, were left to confront their own behavior. The atmosphere was no longer playful. It had become reflective, almost uncomfortable for them. As the waitress walked past the table one last time before the next course, she caught the man's eye. He gave a small, polite nod of acknowledgement, a gesture of gratitude that required no words. She returned the nod with a quiet smile, recognizing the strength in his restraint and the shift it had created. The room settled into a calm, quiet rhythm again. Conversations continued, plates were cleared, but the earlier energy of mockery had dissipated. The executives, now more cautious and subdued, kept their eyes on their own table, while the man remained focused on his meal and his notes, unbothered by the earlier disturbances. The waitress moved on to attend other tables, but she felt a sense of satisfaction. She had witnessed a subtle lesson in respect and patience, a demonstration that quiet strength could outweigh arrogance. And while the man had not raised his voice or demanded attention, his presence alone had reminded everyone in the room that dignity and intelligence are not measured by accent, laughter, or mockery. The evening moved on, and the restaurant began to fill with more guests. The soft music continued to play in the background, creating a calm and relaxed atmosphere. The man finished his main course and carefully pushed his plate away. He seemed thoughtful, like he was reflecting on the day and planning his next steps. He reached for his notebook again and began jotting down a few notes, his handwriting neat and precise. Meanwhile, the executives at the nearby table had grown quieter. Their earlier amusement had faded, replaced by a subtle unease. They glanced at each other but said very little. The quiet confidence of the man across the room was affecting them in ways they did not yet fully understand. It was as if the air had shifted, and their sense of control had slipped. The waitress approached the man's table with a small smile. "Would you like to see the dessert menu? Or are you finished for now?" she asked. The man looked up from his notebook, his eyes calm. I am finished. Thank you," he replied. His accent was gentle and unhurried, each word deliberate. He placed the notebook carefully inside his folder and set it beside his plate. The waitress nodded and moved away to attend other tables. As she passed the executive's table, she noticed their expressions. They were no longer laughing. One of them whispered something, but the words were small, uncertain. Their confidence had dimmed, replaced with quiet reflection. At that moment, the man stood up slowly and began speaking to the waitress. "Excuse me, I need help," he said. "I want to understand something better." The waitress turned to him, curious and attentive. "Of course. What would you like help with?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly, a gesture that conveyed both respect and patience. "I hear people. Sometimes they try to correct me. I want to know who is right." The waitress paused, sensing the tension in the air. She glanced at the executives briefly, then back at the man. "I can help," she said simply. He handed her a piece of paper with a few sentences he had written. "These are what they say. I want correct meaning, correct sound," he said. She studied the paper for a moment. The executives nearby stiffened as they realized the interaction might involve them. They shifted in their chairs, uneasy. The waitress spoke softly but clearly, explaining each word, the proper pronunciation, and the subtle differences in meaning. Her tone was calm, patient, and confident. She did not accuse anyone. She only taught and corrected where it was needed. As she spoke, the executives began to feel a sinking realization. Their mocking words, meant to belittle, were now exposed as incorrect. The man listened carefully, nodding occasionally. There was no embarrassment in his expression, only understanding and appreciation for the clarity she offered. When the explanation was finished, the man smiled at the waitress. "Thank you very much," he said. "I understand now. They were wrong." The executives remained silent. Their earlier laughter had completely vanished. They had not expected the situation to turn in this way. The waitress returned to her work, polite and composed, but the room felt different now. Respect and knowledge had replaced ridicule, and everyone noticed it. The man took a seat again, folding his hands on the table. He looked around the restaurant, observing quietly. His calm presence seemed to influence the energy in the room. People began speaking in softer tones, and conversations took on a more thoughtful rhythm. The executives, humbled and uncertain, no longer sought attention. Their eyes occasionally flicked toward the man and the waitress, realizing that the dynamic had shifted. The waitress returned to the table with a fresh glass of water and a gentle smile. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" she asked. "No, thank you," the man replied. He looked at her with genuine appreciation. There was a quiet strength in his demeanor, a sense that he valued clarity and respect over appearances or status. It was a lesson that resonated throughout the room without needing to be spoken aloud. After a few moments, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. He typed a few notes, then showed the screen to the waitress. I like how you explain," he said. "You are very intelligent." The waitress smiled faintly, keeping her expression professional but warm. "Thank you. I just try to help where I can," she replied. Her tone carried no pride, only sincerity. Across the room, the executives shifted uncomfortably. They realized that their mockery had failed. They had attempted to belittle someone based on how they spoke, only to be corrected gently by someone they had dismissed. The weight of their behavior settled on them. Some glanced down at their glasses, others stared blankly at the table. Their laughter had left, replaced by quiet self-reflection. The man finished his meal and carefully set his utensils aside. He glanced at the waitress one last time. "I appreciate your help," he said. "I will remember this." She nodded politely. "I'm glad I could help," she said softly. He smiled faintly, a quiet, dignified gesture, and began to gather his belongings. The executives watched, now fully aware that the evening had not gone as they had imagined. They had underestimated both the man and the waitress, and it was clear that their assumptions had been wrong. As the man left the table, he paused briefly near the executives' table. He did not say anything directly to them, but his calm and confident presence alone made a subtle statement. The room's energy shifted once more. Respect and awareness replaced arrogance and mockery. The executives looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that they had been humbled. The waitress watched the man leave, then returned to her duties. She continued serving other tables with the same calm efficiency. But the evening had changed for everyone who had witnessed the interaction. People spoke more softly, moved more deliberately, and treated one another with subtle respect that had not been present earlier. The man's exit was quiet but impactful. He did not raise his voice, he did not demand attention, and he did not seek to humiliate. Yet, through simple patience, careful attention, and the guidance of the waitress, the earlier tension had dissolved. The lesson was clear. Respect, knowledge, and composure carried more weight than mockery or arrogance. The executives, still seated, reflected on their behavior. They realized that their attempt to belittle someone had revealed their own insecurities and lack of awareness. The waitress, unnoticed by most diners, had become a quiet force of correction and guidance. The man, through dignity and restraint, had shown that intelligence and confidence are not measured by accent or appearance. By the time the restaurant began to slow down for the evening, the energy in the room was calm and focused. Conversations flowed naturally, laughter was genuine, and the earlier tension was replaced by subtle respect. The waitress moved gracefully between tables, carrying plates and refilling glasses, her presence a stabilizing force. In the quiet moments after the man left, the waitress reflected on what had happened. She understood the power of patience, the importance of correction without confrontation, and the value of quiet dignity. The evening had shown that a calm and intelligent approach could change the mood of a room, correct misunderstandings, and teach lessons without raising a voice. The executives finally left, subdued and thoughtful. Their experience had been a lesson in humility. They had started the evening confident, mocking someone based on their accent, only to discover that respect, knowledge, and composure mattered far more than appearances. The waitress continued her work, carrying herself with quiet pride, knowing she had helped maintain balance and fairness. As the lights dimmed slightly and the last guests prepared to leave, the memory of the evening lingered. It was not marked by drama or conflict, but by subtle correction and quiet strength. The lessons learned would stay with those present longer than any loud argument ever could. The calm intelligence of the man, supported by the guidance of the waitress, had left a lasting impression on everyone who had been there. After the man left the restaurant, the atmosphere slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The soft music continued, and diners began to speak and laugh again, though the energy was more subdued than before. The executives who had earlier mocked the man remained seated, staring at their empty glasses. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between them that their behavior had been inappropriate. The quiet, respectful correction by the waitress had left a mark they could not ignore. The waitress moved through the tables with calm efficiency, refilling drinks and clearing plates. She had noticed the subtle changes in the room. Patrons who had been quiet were now speaking with a little more care, and even some of the staff seemed to carry themselves a little straighter. She could feel the lingering impact of the evening's events, though no one spoke of it directly. Back at the table where the executives had sat, they began discussing the events in hushed tones. "I can't believe how quietly he handled it," one said, shaking his head slightly. "Yeah," another replied. "And the way she explained everything, it was like we weren't even part of the conversation. She didn't judge us, but we felt it anyway." They sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on their behavior. The laughter and mockery that had seemed harmless at first now felt shallow and thoughtless. They realized that true intelligence and respect were measured differently than they had assumed. It was not about sounding a certain way or pretending superiority. The man had taught them that through simple presence and dignity. The waitress returned to her station near the entrance, taking a brief moment to breathe. She glanced around the restaurant, watching the last few diners enjoy their meals. Her mind wandered briefly to the man who had left. She thought about how someone could carry such quiet strength, teaching lessons without raising a voice. It reminded her of how much impact one person could have with patience, clarity, and respect. Outside, the city lights were beginning to glow as night settled in. The man walked calmly down the street, his steps measured and purposeful. He held his folder close, thinking about the day and the people he had encountered. In his mind, the brief exchange at the restaurant was not about proving anyone wrong or winning a battle. It was simply about understanding and communication, about being precise and clear while remaining respectful. Inside the restaurant, the executives were preparing to leave. Their expressions were serious, and the earlier air of confidence had vanished. They had learned something important, though quietly. They had mocked a man for his accent, assuming it reflected weakness or lack of knowledge, only to discover that their assumptions were unfounded. The waitress's calm and precise correction had shifted their perception entirely. They left the restaurant more reflective, humbled, and perhaps a little wiser. The waitress continued her work, moving from table to table, attentive to every detail. She noticed the small gestures of gratitude from the diners, the polite thank yous as people left, and the subtle nods of appreciation from those who had observed the events. Her actions had gone beyond simply serving food. She had helped maintain dignity, fairness, and respect in the room. It was not something most would see, but it mattered deeply. Later, as she cleaned a table near the window, she thought about how the evening had unfolded. She considered how easy it could have been to react emotionally, to confront the executives directly or become involved in the mockery. Instead, she had chosen calm, measured guidance. Her correction had been subtle yet effective, and the man's quiet strength had reinforced the lesson. Together, they had transformed the mood of the room without creating conflict or drama. The executives, walking down the street outside, discussed their experience in low voices. "We misjudged him," one admitted. "And we misjudged her too. I didn't expect someone so calm to correct us without even raising their voice." Another nodded. "It's strange, but I think we learned more tonight than from any meeting or presentation. Sometimes, humility and respect speak louder than words." Meanwhile, the man reached his hotel and stepped inside. He was tired from travel and meetings, but there was a sense of calm in his mind. He reflected on the dinner and the subtle interaction with the waitress. To him, it was not about winning or proving a point. It was about clarity, understanding, and respect. He made a few final notes in his notebook before closing it, satisfied that the evening had unfolded exactly as it should. The waitress, finishing her shift, turned off the last of the dining lights. She walked through the empty restaurant, her steps quiet on the polished floor. She thought about the subtle impact of words, gestures, and patience. She realized that intelligence and respect were not loud or boastful. They were quiet, careful, and observant. And sometimes they were enough to change the mood and awareness of an entire room. Outside, the city hummed with life. Cars passed by, people walked along the sidewalks, and lights glowed in windows. The man, back in his hotel, and the executives, heading home, had all been part of a lesson that evening. One in humility, respect, and quiet dignity. And the waitress, still standing in the empty restaurant, had been the bridge that allowed that lesson to happen without confrontation or conflict. The night grew deeper, and the restaurant settled into stillness. The music faded into silence, and the last staff members prepared to leave. The events of the evening lingered in the air like an invisible thread connecting those who had witnessed it. The man's quiet strength, the waitress's patient correction, and the executive's humbled realization created a story that was simple, human, and powerful. It was not a story told in shouts or dramatics, but in small, meaningful gestures and words that carried weight beyond appearances. In the quiet of the empty restaurant, the waitress took one last glance around. She thought about how easy it would have been to ignore the situation or let it unfold unchecked. Instead, she had chosen to act with care and knowledge. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone present that true understanding, respect, and patience often speak louder than laughter or mockery ever could. The city continued its steady rhythm outside, indifferent to the quiet lessons inside. But within that restaurant, something had shifted. The balance between arrogance and humility, mockery and respect, had been subtly but clearly realigned. And for those who had witnessed it, the memory of that evening would remain, a quiet reminder of the power of dignity, knowledge, and calm guidance. The morning after the restaurant encounter, the city was alive with the usual hum of traffic and activity. People hurried along the sidewalks, talking on phones, sipping coffee, or heading to meetings. Inside a quiet hotel room, the man from the restaurant reviewed the notes he had written the previous evening. His thoughts wandered back to the dinner and the subtle interaction with the waitress. He reflected on how patience, calmness, and clarity had shifted the entire dynamic in the room, without anyone raising their voice or making a scene. He considered the executives who had mocked him. It wasn't anger or revenge he felt, but a quiet satisfaction that the misunderstanding had been corrected. He understood that people often judge too quickly, based on appearances or accents, but he had witnessed firsthand how respect and knowledge could change perception. He smiled faintly, appreciating the small yet meaningful impact of that evening. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, the waitress began her day with the usual preparations. Tables were polished, menus arranged neatly, and chairs set in place. Yet, even amid the routine, she remembered the events of the previous night. She reflected on the power of her calm guidance and the quiet dignity of the man. She realized how much influence small acts of patience and clarity could have on others, even if unnoticed by most. Throughout the day, the staff shared quiet observations about the previous evening. Some diners had commented on how composed and professional everyone had been, but none had seen the deeper lessons that had unfolded quietly. The waitress, however, carried the memory of the impact, knowing that subtle wisdom had been demonstrated without drama or confrontation. She went about her work with a sense of calm satisfaction, knowing she had played a part in a moment of human understanding. The executives, on their way back to their offices, talked in subdued voices. "I think we were completely wrong," one admitted. "We judged him by his accent, by the way he sounded, and we mocked him. And then, it just flipped. It was so quiet, but it was clear we were out of line." Another nodded slowly. "She corrected us without anger. He carried himself without defensiveness. I've never felt so humbled by a situation that seemed so small at first." The man, now at his office preparing for the day's meetings, reviewed his plans with focus. He did not dwell on what had happened, but he appreciated the lessons it contained. For him, it was a reminder that true influence does not require loud words or aggressive confrontation. It can exist quietly, through patience, clarity, and respect. The restaurant reopened for lunch, and the waitress continued her work with attention to every detail. Customers came and went, each unaware of the subtle shift that had occurred the night before. Yet the atmosphere felt different, as if a quiet balance had been restored. The staff moved with greater awareness, and patrons sensed a calm energy that was not there before. During her shift, a few customers complimented her on her professionalism and calm demeanor. They noticed the way she explained menu items clearly and patiently, and how she seemed to handle every situation with grace. The praise was small but meaningful. It reminded her that patience and clarity often resonate more than grand gestures or loud words. Later in the afternoon, the man returned to the restaurant briefly. He walked in quietly, nodding to the staff as he passed. The waitress noticed him and greeted him politely. "Good afternoon," she said. "Good afternoon," he replied. "I wanted to thank you again for last night." Her smile was calm and modest. "You're welcome. I'm glad I could help," she said. Her tone conveyed sincerity without seeking attention. He took a seat briefly just to speak a few words. "You handled it very well. I learned something too. How to be patient, how to respond without conflict. I will remember this evening." The waitress nodded. "Sometimes, patience and clarity can speak louder than any confrontation," she said. Her words were simple but true, and they resonated with him. As he left the restaurant, he paused near the executive's table, now empty, and gave a quiet nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, not accusation. The room seemed to carry a subtle reminder of the events, a memory of the quiet lessons that had unfolded. The executives, arriving later to clean up the space, reflected on their behavior and realized that the evening had given them a lesson in humility and awareness that they would not forget. Back at the restaurant, the waitress finished her shift, turning off lights and ensuring everything was in order. She walked through the empty dining room and reflected on the evening and the subsequent day. The lesson was clear. Dignity, patience, and knowledge could change perceptions and teach others without confrontation. She had witnessed it firsthand, and she had played a key part in that transformation. Outside, the city moved forward with its usual pace, oblivious to the quiet events in the restaurant and the small, meaningful lessons that had taken place. For the man, the lesson was a reminder of calm confidence and quiet authority. For the waitress, it was a reminder of the power of patient guidance. And for those executives, it was a humbling experience that challenged their assumptions and reminded them that appearances and accents do not define intelligence, knowledge, or character. As night fell, the man reviewed his notes once more in his hotel room, reflecting on how a simple dinner had turned into a moment of insight and respect. The memory of the waitress's calm correction stayed with him, reinforcing the idea that true influence comes not from loud words or mockery, but from clarity, patience, and quiet dignity. The waitress closed the restaurant for the night, walking through the quiet space one last time. She thought about how small actions could carry profound meaning, how respect and understanding could transform a room. She understood that every interaction had the potential to teach and guide, sometimes in ways that were subtle yet lasting. The executives returned to their homes, carrying the lesson with them, quietly reflecting on their behavior. They had started the evening confident, mocking someone based on their accent, and ended it humbled, aware, and a little wiser. The man had not confronted them aggressively. The waitress had not judged them harshly. Yet the impact of their actions was clear and lasting. In the stillness of the city night, the lessons of the evening lingered quietly in the minds of those involved. It was a story of patience, dignity, respect, and the subtle power of human understanding. Small gestures, careful words, and quiet observation had created a ripple effect that transformed not only one table, but the awareness of everyone present. The man, the waitress, and even the executives carried this experience with them, each in their own way. The story was not one of drama or confrontation, but of human connection, humility, and the quiet lessons that sometimes speak louder than any loud argument or loud laughter ever could. The events of that evening became a memory, a gentle reminder of the power of patience, clarity, and respect in a world that often overlooks them.